It's a big year for Michigan in 2024, and it's going to be an interesting year that has a lot of questions heading into the season. Sherrone Moore takes over for Jim Harbaugh. There's obviously some off-field issues that need to be addressed. We're not going to dive into that today. We're going to take a deep dive into the Michigan Wolverines, the defending national champs, a team that went 15-0 last year, and see what should we expect from this team in 2024 on the field. Before we do that, though, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. It goes a long way in helping this channel grow. It has already done wonders for the channel, and that is not possible without all of you. So if you love college football, if you love the Michigan Wolverines, subscribe to the channel and let's dive in to what Michigan should do. When you're looking at the 2024 season, a lot has changed, obviously. Sherrone Moore is now the head coach after being the offensive coordinator. There obviously were a ton of storylines surrounding Michigan last year, and there's a lot once again in 2024. Kirk Campbell takes over for the offense. Wink Martindale takes over the defense. So you have two new coordinators coming in a way. Sherrone Moore obviously is back, but you have two new coordinators in that role, their respective roles. You're looking at, I think you're looking at a group that is really interesting in terms of what they bring to the table and what this offense is going to look like. This was a defense that was a really elite group and really fun to watch. That's kind of the expectation. And when you look at this group, we'll dive into them more obviously later in the video, but this is a group that has tons of potential to be a really good group, another elite group in 2024. Now, the transfer portal, obviously, they took some hits, but also I think they did a pretty good job of retaining talent that at least whatever was coming back could return. And they also brought in a couple players that should step up and compete for starting spots right off the bat. CJ Charleston's an interesting player coming from Youngstown State. Wesley Walker on the defensive side of the ball, along with Ricky Johnson. Those are two defensive backs. Keep an eye on there. And then obviously, Jayshon Barham is the guy that everyone's been talking about, someone who's going to be really good for this defense. Comes in from Maryland. And we'll dive into him more later in the video. When you look at what they lost, losing Keon Saab probably was a little difficult, a tough pill to swallow. Amir Herring could it be seen as a disappointment, but I think that they did a pretty good job of keeping the right players in place and retaining certain guys and finding guys to replace NFL talent. And one of those NFL talent players is JJ McCarthy, which means that the quarterback is open for competition. And we've seen that throughout the entire offseason. We don't know who's going to be the starter. Alex Orji is the guy that everyone's been talking about so far. And we'll see if that actually holds true. And we'll see what this offense looks like with him running the show. There obviously are some questions. Maybe Davis Warren is the guy. Jack Tuttle is back. You have options. It's just a matter of who's going to be the more reliable option, who's going to be the better option for this offense. Orgy obviously can run the ball. He is someone who brings a big frame at 6'3", 235 pounds. Didn't throw a pass last year, according to college football stats, but we'll see what he can do. There obviously are some concerns about his ability to throw the football, and then you just have other concerns. You didn't see a ton from Warren or Tuttle. So the quarterback position is going to be an interesting one. JJ McCarthy obviously did some really good things for this offense, but again, so much has changed. The players that you're throwing to are different. The running backs are going to be mostly different. The offensive line is going to look drastically different. So you have a ton of different things playing a role in 2024. So that's going to be tough. So there's certain things that you maybe have to take into consideration before you just make any assumptions. But the quarterback position is obviously under the spotlight constantly, regardless of what team you cheer for. The Michigan Wolverines obviously will be one of those teams that it's under the spotlight. Losing a first round talent automatically means that who is the replacements are going to be under that spotlight. So if it is Alex Orgy, then great. If it's someone else, we will see. It's going to be a little while, I think, before we get that sorted out. And it will be interesting to see who steps up in a big way. Losing Blake Corum obviously hurt as well at the running back position. The nice thing is that Michigan returns Donovan Edwards. Now, Donovan Edwards has been a busy man in the offseason. He has been someone who's trying to prove that he can be RB1 for Michigan, has plenty of explosive talent to be that guy. And we'll dive more into his development a little bit, but also he's been obviously very involved with the college football 25 video game, someone who is very, very animated, a fun personality to watch. We've seen some of the videos with the college football 25 promotions. He's been on there. He's been really fun to watch. And his personality is kind of like his game, very exciting. People gravitate towards him. And one thing that I think we've learned about Donovan Edwards is that he's learned that he has explosive ability, but he can't just do everything by himself. And everything that I've heard and read about Donovan Edwards is that he's learned that you need to rely on your teammates sometimes to make things easier for you. Now, Donovan Edwards is a touchdown waiting to happen. He is someone that can take it to the house on any play, and we've seen that over the last couple of years. But there are times where taking 5 yards is better than trying to find a home run, and you don't always need to go home run or strikeout. Singles and doubles are going to work. And that's something that will help him tremendously. And I think we saw that towards the end of the year. You saw a guy who was a little bit more patient, a guy who was okay with taking, chunks of yards instead of just trying to get in the end zone. And that's one thing that Blake Corum did really well is he was okay with, now granted, Blake Corum was not quite the home run threat as most other running backs simply because of his size, but he was okay with taking 4 to 6 yards at a time because he knew the long game. That's going to help us more than trying to hit a home run and striking out a bunch. Donovan Edwards has done a good job of developing almost like his mental game more than anything. He understands what's best for this team, and he'll be really fun to watch when he puts it all together this year. And you get to see a guy who definitely has the ability to be 1,000 yard back, and that's going to be huge, especially with the quarterback position kind of up in the air right now. Kalel Mullings is back as well, 6'2", 233 pounds. So that's a big body running the football. You also have a freshman in Jordan Marshall that should step up and be part of that rotation as well. So you feel pretty good about the offense in terms of what they have in terms of talent. You just need to see certain guys step up. And then what does that look like in games? What does that look like when it actually matters, when the score counts? That's going to be the biggest question, especially for a team that finished 15-0 last year. The passing attack must get better. I think that's the one thing that will help this team tremendously is this is a group that was not elite throwing the football, and you also lose certain players. Cornelius Johnson is back or gone, excuse me. Roman Wilson is gone, and those are two guys that maybe weren't on everyone's radar in the country, but those were two guys that were very valuable to Michigan's passing attack. Fortunately for Michigan, they have guys coming back that they feel pretty good about. It just may not be an NFL talent that is going to replace either of them. Frederick Moore would be the one of those guys. Tyler Morris made some big plays for Michigan last year. You also saw Samaj Morgan make some big plays. So you have a couple of guys that know what it takes to win. Morgan's also going to be a factor in the return game. So you have guys that are coming back that you feel pretty good about. You just don't know what is the ceiling for that group. CJ Charleston, we mentioned before, comes in from Youngstown State. He is a name to keep an eye on because of what he can do. So we'll see what he's capable of doing with this passing attack. The tight end position is interesting because you have a couple of new faces that are going to step up. Marlon Klein is one of those, 6'6", 247 pounds. You have Zach Marshall, who's a sophomore, Brady Prescore, a freshman. You have guys that are coming back and coming to the program that are relatively inexperienced. So we don't really know what to expect from that group. Colston Loveland is the star of this group, though. Everyone knows what he's capable of doing. He is a potential first round pick in next year's draft, 6'5", 245 pounds. I really like Colston Loveland. I've been a fan of him since we saw him step on the field for the first time. A really underrated player in certain aspects and a good tight end, a good pass catching tight end for Michigan. So he could be the go-to guy until the wide receivers sort things out. We don't really know what to expect from this passing attack outside of Colston Loveland. So that's probably one of the bigger questions you have if you are a Michigan fan is what is that passing attack going to look like? What is this group as a whole going to look like? And how do the skill positions step up in a big way? When you lose the amount of talent that you lost, if you're Michigan, especially offensively, you are definitely going to have some questions. And that also applies to the offensive line. And one thing that I've learned with Sherrone Moore is that you kind of have to give him the benefit of the doubt that you're going to have an offensive line that sorts things out, that gets things figured out. And this is a group that is trying to replace a ton of talent. So you'll see a number of players that don't have a ton of starts. You have guys with experience, but you don't have guys that have played a full season. So guys like Miles Hilton coming back is really what makes you feel a little bit better. You do have some veterans that have starting experience. You also get Josh Creeby from Northwestern, who has plenty of starting experience as well. But then when you look at Giovanni El Hadi, Greg Crippen, and Andrew Gentry, you have three combined starts between those three guys. So you have a ton of inexperience, but when you're in the program for a while, you feel pretty good. It's just a matter of sorting things out. But again, offensive lines take time to gel. It's not like you can just throw these guys in. It doesn't matter if you're recruiting at a high level. They have to learn how to play with each other. They have to learn how to communicate. They have to learn what does the guy to my left really like to do, or what is he good at? What does he struggle with? What is the guy to my right? Same thing. You have to figure things out and find ways to gel. And that doesn't just happen in one offseason because when you're playing against your own team, things are kind of controlled for the most part. There's certain, obviously, aspects of practice that are uncontrolled in terms of what you get from the defense. So that's going to be tough. The nice thing for this offensive line, they have a really good defensive line that's going to test them. And that can really, really helpful heading into the season and sorting out who's going to be the starting group and who is just not cut out for it quite yet. Behind them, again, you're seeing on the screen, you have plenty of games played. You just don't have a ton of games started. So that's going to be the biggest question for this offensive line is who is ready to take that next step? Who is prepared to make Michigan better? Because everything starts up front. I don't care how good your skill position talent is. If you do not have a good offensive line, you are going nowhere. That is going to be a fact for every college football contender. And Michigan has a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball. The nice thing for Michigan is that their defensive side of the ball has far less questions. You have more answers on the defense than you do questions. Now, the front group, the defensive line, is going to be fun. Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart are back, and both of them are explosive weapons that can be really fun to watch for Michigan. Now, Michigan's had some really good defensive ends in years past. Now, I don't know if Stewart and Moore are going to be in that same category, but they play the game with a fire that a lot of people can't replicate. Josiah Stewart is former Coastal Carolina transfer, so he comes in with that chip on his shoulder of nobody wanted me. I had to prove my way. I had to work my way up, and now he is back to show that he can be a all Big Ten player, and I think that he is a really fun player to watch on the edge. Derek Moore is back for another season with Michigan, and he is someone who is going to be a valuable piece to have. And I think this is really weird to say because most of the time when you're talking about defensive lines, you say, oh, well, the defensive ends are going to command most of the attention so that teams have to, chip their way, send extra help their way, and that's going to help the defensive tackles. Michigan almost has the opposite problem. Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham are two of the best defensive tackles in college football. I would make an argument that Mason Graham is the best defensive tackle in the entire country. And again, it's kind of the opposite problem. Teams have to worry about those two more so than they really have to worry about Stewart and Moore. I'm not saying they don't have to worry about those two, but they have to worry more about what Grant and Graham can do. And that leaves a lot of exciting opportunities if you're Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. And they know that. They know that one of these guys is going to get home because there's only so many assets that you can send to one guy. You cannot send extra help to Graham or to Grant because that leaves Moore and Stewart in one-on-one situations. And that's typically not going to go well for any team that they're facing. Now, the same thing can be said if you're sending a running back to chip on the edge. You're leaving Mason Graham one-on-one potentially with a guard or a center. He's probably going to win more of those battles than lose. Same thing with Kenneth Grant. So that's kind of the dilemma teams have when they face Michigan. And again, like we talked about, more answers than questions. You have, I think the questions more for this team is like, what ways can we get creative? What can Wink Martindale do to change things up and make things difficult for the opposing team? Because basically, off pure talent, you feel pretty good. Now you can add wrinkles in that a lot of other teams maybe can't. The defensive end position is going to be really interesting because I don't feel that there's a ton of depth, but there's a lot of talent behind them that the staff feels pretty good about. Cameron Brandt only had 4 tackles last year, but the staff feels pretty good about where he's at. TJ Guy has some better experience, another guy that could play a bigger role for this team in 2024. I think the two biggest X factors for this group are going to be Rayshon Benny and Eno Etta. Those are two guys that have plenty of talent, that have been putting in good work in the offseason. That staff has been raving about both those guys and what they can do. So Grant and Graham are going to be the stars of the show, but what can the guys behind them do to provide depth and make things better for everybody around them? And this is a group, again, when you're looking at where Michigan ranked, elite group, arguably the best defense in college football for a lot of people. You have to replace a number of talented players, especially at linebacker as well. But the transfer portal is where Michigan's done a really good job of recruiting and getting long-term players, as well as some guys that are maybe short-term options. Jason Barham is one of those potential short-term options that is set to have a big year. And he was a stud for Maryland. And now he takes over for a linebacker group at Michigan that was very good. And he is ready to prove that he can take that next step and be a stud for Michigan as well. Ernest Hausman is back. He was a good contributor for this Michigan defense. Now he is going to be the certified starter for sure. The depth behind them maybe is a little bit of a question. You have Jimmy Rolder coming back, Jaden Hood, but those are two guys that don't have a ton of experience. So somebody's going to have to step up. You maybe have questions about the depth behind the linebackers that are starting, but you also feel pretty good about where this team is headed because of what they have up front. The front group makes it very easy for the linebackers to get good reads, to find where the ball carrier is going. So you don't need them to be heroes because of the talent you have up front. You're obviously going to need to find some depth pretty quick. But again, things should be pretty simple with what you have coming back. The secondary is kind of in a similar boat where you have to replace a couple of key players. Mike Shamer still leaving, obviously hurts. You lose Ron Moore in the offseason, so that's going to hurt quite a bit. But obviously, everyone knows who Will Johnson is. That's really a player that everyone's known for a little while. Came into Michigan and made his name known as a freshman, and now has his sights set on being a potential top 10 pick in next year's NFL draft. 6'2", 202 pounds, 4 interceptions last year. And that's key because teams knew what he was capable of doing. Now, granted, when you have a good freshman year, teams are still going to test you. They're going to question if, hey, are you actually that good? Or was last year just kind of an anomaly? You're riding that high of being good as a freshman. They're going to test him. And teams, unfortunately for them, paid the price. Will Johnson is that good. He is arguably the best corner in college football. There's a lot of people that would argue that. I probably lean in that same direction. I think he's that good, a very good player. Even with Travis Hunter, I think Will Johnson is a stud, and he's going to be a stud again for Michigan. And teams are definitely going to avoid him this year. That's going to put a lot of pressure on a guy like Jair Hill because teams know what Will Johnson is capable of doing. They haven't seen a ton of Hill. They're going to say, okay, are you ready to take that step? Are you ready to prove your worth? Or are you going to be a liability for this defense and we can just exploit you every single play? Now, Hill has good size as well at 6'2", 185 pounds. So learning from Johnson as well as playing with confidence will be a big thing for him. Zeke Berry is coming back at the nickelback position. He is, again, another player with inexperience, but he is someone who's super talented and that staff really likes. And again, this should be a fun group to watch in 2024. Makari Page and Wesley Walker will be the safeties. Those are guys who are going to have to learn how to play with each other. Page comes in at 6'4", 208 pounds. So that's good size, a great size, I should say, for the safety position. I feel very confident in what this group can do in terms of talent. It's just a matter of who's going to step up and help Johnson be, I should say, contribute to a defense that is expected to continue playing at a high level. I think you have some questions in the secondary as well, linebacker depth, but overall you feel pretty good about where this defense is at. I think that Wink Martindale has a lot to work with and that should still be one of the better defenses in college football. That much shouldn't change. And that's really good because of the questions you have offensively. Now, when you go into what the schedule looks like, when you look at what this team must face, it's going to get real. It is going to be a reality check pretty quick. Now, obviously, you have Fresno State right off the bat. No one in Michigan has any concerns about that, especially after Jeff Tedford had to retire and step down as head coach for Fresno State. They already are working with an interim coach. We will see what Fresno State looks like. They are not on the level of Michigan, even with all the questions that Michigan has. Texas at home is going to be tough. There is no way to sugarcoat that. That's where you probably have some concerns if you're a Michigan fan because of the questions you have offensively, because of the concerns you have at certain positions. Texas is a team that expects to win a national championship this year, and that provides a lot of concerns if you are a Michigan fan and trying to figure out are we going to be able to hang with a team like Texas? So that's the first big question of the season. Arkansas State's going to be a win. USC could be tough, though the game is at home. Michigan's better than Minnesota. That should be a win. And then you go on a 2-game road trip, but you have 2 weeks between them at Washington. We'll see what Washington looks like at that point in the season. Illinois is going to be better. So that one is very interesting, but Michigan has 2 weeks to prepare for that. Michigan State at home, that's a rivalry game. But it's also before the Oregon game. That's an Oregon team that expects to compete for a national championship as well. And that could be I won't say a look ahead game, but you have a rivalry game in Michigan State that could be problematic. They really have nothing to lose, and you have Oregon faced with them next week. Then you get at Indiana. Indiana will definitely know if this is a surprise team or not. That could be a tougher game if Kurt Signetti has the Hoosiers playing well. But again, Michigan is the better team, the more talented team for sure. Northwestern at home, I don't have any concerns. And then obviously Ohio State. Ohio State is going to be the game that people have circled, and everyone knows what's at stake there. They understand the history between these two schools, the rivalry game, yada, yada, yada. Everyone knows Michigan, Ohio State. There's really not much to discuss when it comes to Michigan, Ohio State. But again, that has a lot of big time implications in terms of the Big Ten championship game, the college football playoff. So you're looking at a potential, I think, a huge game, depending on where Michigan stands at this point, depending on where Ohio State stands at that point. Even teams like Oregon, where do they stand the in terms of the Big Ten race? Now, one of the weird things to see is that you obviously don't see Penn State on the schedule, with obviously how things are working out in the Big Ten and adding so many different schools. You don't have a ton of yeah, I mean, you have some familiar schools, but not having Penn State feels kind of weird. And that's going to take some time to get it used to. But you also know that this is a group that will adapt to the kind of that stuff. You play Oregon instead of Penn State. So you get the same quality of opponent, if not better. To me, this one was hard for ceiling and floor. I feel like this is a group that 9-3 felt kind of generous, honestly. Texas is a losable game. USC, depending on especially depending on how that Texas game goes, USC could be a potential tough game as well. We don't know what Washington is going to be, but that shouldn't be a losable game, but it's on the road. Illinois is just a team that should be better. I really don't know. Michigan State's a rivalry game, so that's a potential tricky one. But again, Michigan is the better team. Oregon is going to be tough, even though it's at home. That Ohio State is very tough as well. But again, when some of those questions offensively arise, I think that you still have certain things that must play out. You just don't have the team you did last year. So to me, the floor is 8-4. I think that if things aren't going well and things may not go well, 8-4 is definitely a possibility. You have a new coaching staff, you have two new offensive coordinators, you have pretty much a new starter almost everywhere offensively. the defense can't do everything. So you're facing really good competition. That really is more just like respect to the rest of the competition you're facing. Now, if they figure things out and things are going right, I think 11-1 is the ceiling. I truly think that even if things are going right, there's one game that's going to trip you up. Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. I mean, I'd be shocked if Michigan wins all three of those games. Not because I don't think they can do it, but there's just a lot that needs to be figured out for Michigan. And to be able to win all three of those games in that tough of the schedule just speaks to how difficult the Big Ten is going to be from here on out. So it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just what I think reality is. Somewhere in between that is just fine. You're in contention for the college football playoff. That's really all that matters, anyways. You know, Ohio State, obviously, at the end of the year. So if you're 10-1 going into the Ohio State game and you win that game and then you play for the Big Ten championship and make it to the college football playoff, you're feeling pretty good. You're not going to be upset about one loss here at the beginning of the season. But Sherrone Moore has a lot of work to do. There's obviously some off-field issues that we'll see how those play out, how that affects this team. Again, a lot of questions for Michigan, but they've done a good job of recruiting. They have the right guys in place. They retain a key person in Sherrone Moore to keep running this program. And I think Michigan feels like they're in good hands heading into 2024.